I'm Christy. Today I want to talk to you about two more areas of disability. So last week I talked about how I tend to break disability down into two broad categories, physical and mental. In thinking about this series, I realized there are two other broad categories that need to be addressed, social and behavior. I should pause here and say that I have little to no experience with either of these areas. However, I've talked to plenty of people who are very familiar with them. Once you join the special needs community, you pretty much expose yourself to every kind of disability. A behavior issue as a disability is a tricky one. People, and kids especially, can have behavior issues for many different reasons. Many of those reasons are completely unrelated to special needs or disability. So, how do you figure out if a behavior issue is a true disability or if it's simply another issue to address in a person's life? Mentalhealth.gov explains it this way. Quote, behavioral disorders involve a pattern of disruptive behaviors in children that last for at least 6 months and cause problems in school, at home, and in social situations. Nearly everyone shows some of these behaviors at times, but behavioral disorders are more serious, end quote. And you can find a link to that article over on the blog. That's at www.havenofhopeforme.com. This originally posted in November of 2021. Now, while I haven't confirmed this, I strongly suspect that the same would hold true for older individuals like past childhood as well. I also suspect that strong consideration is given to the circumstances in an individual's life that will cause them to act out. Once the situation is resolved or adapted to, the behavior issues could disappear on their own. In this case, no disability is present. This confirms that it is possible for behavior issues to qualify as true disability. The same article I mentioned above also says behavioral disorders include attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, and conduct disorder, end quote. Now, I don't want to get into a debate over whether or not ADHD is a disability. That's not what this post is about. Rather, I'm focusing on the fact that there are times when a person's behavior gets in the way of their ability to function in the world in socially acceptable ways. It's at this point that they should qualify as having a disability and be able to receive the assistance that they need to learn how to function more appropriately in society. Now, sometimes an undiagnosed learning disability triggers inappropriate behavior. And sometimes the frustration from the learning disability, diagnosed or undiagnosed, causes the behavior issues. A third option could be that there are two disabilities going on at the same time, a learning disability and a behavior disability. VeryWellFamily.com talks about how learning disabilities impact behaviors in this article. I've got a link to it over on the blog. It includes a list of signs of learning disabilities, as well as sections on the impact on an individual and how to get help. While it's written specifically towards helping children, I think a lot of the information would apply to the whole lifespan. Now, VeryWellFamily.com also has an article that I linked to in the blog, specifically about teens with learning disabilities. Now, regardless of the reason or the cause, the key takeaway is that it is possible for two different disabilities to be impacting a person's life at the same time. Distinguishing between it all is difficult. Progress is made, though, when a good doctor guides the individual into a healthy path, and the person receives support and encouragement as they work to make the changes necessary. Now, social issues are another hard one to see as disability. Let's face it, some people are just socially awkward, and there's absolutely nothing wrong to them, at least from a disability perspective. Others struggle with mental health issues, but would not consider themselves disabled. In trying to find a solid definition of a social disability, I discovered there isn't really one. Most of the sites I did find specifically focus on qualifying for SSI or SSDI, Social Security Disability Income, and what issues or diagnoses qualify there. Now, that said, it appears that, generally speaking, social issues fall into several different categories. Depression, anxiety, and other issues related to these two areas could qualify as a disability. The autism spectrum also falls under this social category. Now, once again, just having a diagnosis in any of these areas does not mean that a person is disabled. Well, technically, they may qualify as disabled. However, I know people who have these diagnoses who would not consider themselves as having a disability. On the other hand, if the symptoms are severe enough or have a significant impact on daily life and activities, then many with these diagnoses would consider themselves disabled. This is another category where it's very possible, and maybe even likely, that a single individual will have multiple diagnoses that qualify as disability. Now, many of these issues, depression and anxiety specifically, but not exclusively, can be triggered by another disability. For example, if someone with mental impairment has trouble making friends, they may develop depression and or anxiety issues because of their lack of friends. They could also develop behavior issues out of the frustration they feel without an appropriate way to express that frustration. As another example, someone with autism could develop behavior issues because they don't know how to behave properly in public. They could also develop behavior issues because they're frustrated that people don't like them and aren't friends with them. This can, in turn, lead to depression and or anxiety when they have to go out in public. Now, these two examples show how multiple issues, which could each qualify as a disability on their own, can come together in one person and complicate a diagnosis, as well as make life hard to manage. Autism has received a lot of attention over the past number of years. Explanations for why the dramatic rise in cases abound. Arguments rage, and people continue to seek out diagnoses. Now, while I don't want to get into arguments for or against, I do want to address the issue briefly. Autism is absolutely a disability, regardless of how you qualify it or where you place it in your categories. Yes, the severity dramatically varies. I personally know of people who are fully functioning at age-appropriate levels, going off to college at 18, holding down jobs, adulting. And yet, they're still a bit quirky and socially awkward at times. I also know people who are so severe they're barely aware of the world around them. They truly exist in their own little world. And yet, both extremes qualify as autistic. Now, I'm mentioning autism here under the social category simply because the lack of social understanding is one of the primary issues that somebody with autism faces. And I needed a place to put it in my framework. All of this leads me to my question for this week. How would you explain behavior and social issues? What are your thoughts and comments? I'd love to hear about them. You can leave me a comment below, or you can leave me a comment over on the blog. That's at www.havenofhopeforme.com. This originally posted in November of 2021. I'm continuing to think through and clarify these issues in my mind so that I can continue to say that life is good and there is never a dull moment.